Hello. So this is going to be a guide on Sorcerer PvE in Menma's Tera. Most of what I talk about in this section, it's already in the Sorcerer Discord, so you can just read up on it, and I'll be pretty quick about it. So first thing is we'll talk about setup. So when it comes to gear, you go Magic Crit Power on your weapon and cooldown on the disc. You go Magic Crit Power on your glove, and then application, your chest, boot, brooch, bast, mount. And then for your jewelry, you take any combination of amplification and magic crit power you can get. And for the etchings, you take any combination of crit and power that you need to get to the crit. So for your crit cap, you want to be no lower than 214, but you can go a bit higher if you feel uncomfortable with this low crit. So for example, you can put on more crit crystals and go up to like 238, go down a little bit. It's up to you, but don't go below 214. Otherwise, your results are going to be very inconsistent. For your pet, you use amplification pet, and then inside your pet, you can auto pot, HP, and divine infusion if you need it from mana. Make sure you have root beer at all times and have it go with your mana boost, and then have your brooch, of course, go with your mana boost. For your glyphs, this is what I use, but some of it is preferential, like Grounded Nova and Mana on Lightning, but most of it you can't really change, so you just kind of keep it as it is. And then for advanced skills, you use Cold Wave and Mysterious. There isn't really anything else you can take. And finally, for EP, this is what I have. Again, the most important things would be the power over here, the propulsion on lightning, reload on void pulse, reload on hailstorm, velocity on nova, amplification, mana boost, etc. And then some of it is kind of whatever. Like so, this stuff, like the strengthened EP, they're kind of whatever, but you can take them just because why not? So when it comes to consumables, you have two options, which is the strong Canaphora version and the Brave multi-nostrum version of the multi-nostrums, but all they really do is give you a strong cane and all the other important buffs, or bravery and other important buffs, or strong bravery. So on Sorg, ideally you want to use Canaphora because you don't need the extra attack speed. But if you feel uncomfortable with a dungeon or you're learning the class, you can use the bravery if you want to. But you do want to get used to using the strong cane one whenever the time kind of comes. So here I'm going to talk a bit about what some of your skills do and their interactions. So the first one I want to talk about is Arcane Pulse and Nova. So both of these, they give you a crit buff, right, when you cast it, and that crit buff increases your crit rate by 75 points. So 2.5x according to your glyph. So how that might look like is let's look at my profile, and you'll see I have 214. But when I cast Nova, it goes up to 289. And that happens because of the glyph. Another thing that Arcane and Nova does is that you have a passive where if you hit these skills, it increases the damage your ice lance by 30% for 4 seconds. So how that might look like is I hit, like, I just lance for it, right? And it's doing 953k per hit, right? 993. And then if I hit Nova, then I do that, you'll see it went up to 1.2 mil. So that's really important to optimize your ice lances, because if you don't have the buff up, you just lose 30% damage for free. Now, another two interactions I want to talk about is first, your Nova's cooldown gets reduced by 1 second every time you crit lightning. So that comes from your EP. And I will show you how it looks like. So I use Nova, right, it's at 7 seconds, and I crit, right, it reduces the cooldown by 1 second. And I crit, it reduces the cooldown by another second. So this is really important because in your rotation, you need lightning to crit once every rotation for your Nova to come up in time for your rotation to feel through. And we do build our rotation around this, but we'll get to that. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is Hailstorm has a passive where when you take it, it gives you a stacking buff down here at the bottom, you can see. and that gives you cooldown reduction per stack, and that adds up to 7.2%, which is an entire cooldown line of like your weapon, for example, and that is very important to keep up at all times for your rotation's fluency. There's two more things I want to talk about. The first thing is a thing called rotating refusion. So for sword, when you cast a fusion, you can get it by getting two elements by casting any of your skills. You get the elements like this, for example. And then after you cast that fusion, it will give you a buff down here at the bottom, which makes it so if you cast a different fusion from that element, it will increase the damage of that fusion by 20%. So that buff is not something you want to try to optimize when you're learning, or really at all. Because usually what happens when you're playing sword is you're gonna be matching your skills on your rotation, and you'll usually end up on iceberg. So if you're gonna try to rotate it, you usually end up throwing fireball, and then that goes into the prime flame. The thing is, fireball is not a very good skill for doing damage, but like you have to cast it to rotate your fusions. And most of the time when you're learning, it's better to just cast the fusion directly because you'll probably lose more damage trying to rotate it forcefully than just hitting it off cooldown twice, since it's not like that big of a deal right now. The second thing is for sword, you have a passive when you jaunt. So when you jaunt like this, you've got this thing that lasts for 5 seconds. That's called spatial gap. And what that does is you get full back crit when you have that buff up. So a lot of times you can jaunt to the side of the boss to dodge a mechanic and just hit it from the side for a little bit and then go back to the back when the buff runs out. And that way you don't lose back time when you're trying to DPS the boss. Over here, you'll see in the middle of my screen, I have a nice little snip that shows me explaining how Sorc is to be played on a basic level. So this is functionally how your priorities are on this class. So you have Fusion, Ice Lance, and Hailstorm. And these three skills you want to cast off cooldown as much as possible. And then once they're off cooldown, you want to basically separate your Arcane Void Pulse and your Meteor Nova into two different blocks of skills. And then after you cast that, you want to cast one or two fillers between the blocks to make sure their cooldowns are set up that way. So I'll show you how this might look like in practice. So at the beginning, I want to get the Fusion and the Ice Lance and the Hailstorm off cooldown as soon as possible. So it might look something like this, right? And it's off cooldown. I go Arcane Void Pulse, put a filler. And then I go Meteor Nova, put a filler, put skills. Then Arcane Void Pulse, put a filler. Meteor Nova, put skills, put a filler, drop. Okay, Void Pulse, put a filler. Meteor Nova, import skills after the filler. Right, okay, Void Pulse, filler. Meteor Nova, you know, import skills, filler. Okay, Void Pulse, filler. Meteor Nova, import skills. And then you basically just do that the entire fight. That is more or less the basic sword rotation outside of burn. So in this section, I want to talk a little bit more about filler priorities. So back in the day, you used to have lightning, frost sphere, painful trap, flame barrage, fireball, etc. Because you had a lot less cooldown reduction. But nowadays, it's pretty much just lightning and frost sphere. So when it comes to your fillers, you always prioritize lightning. But because we have so much cooldown these days, you don't want to over spam it, and you want to go to your core as soon as possible. So I talked about earlier how you need your lightning to crit once in every single rotation for your Nova to come off cooldown properly. So I'm going to demonstrate what happens if I don't cast lightning at all in a rotation, but everything else the same. So let's say I start the rotation with a Fusion and Hailstorm into everything else, right? So it's like this. Into a Fusion, into everything else, right? So here I cast skill, but I didn't cast lightning, right? So you see Nova got stalled. Then I go Arcane, Void Pulse, Filler, and I cast Meteor, and I didn't cast lightning, so you see Nova gets stalled again. And I go Arcane, what it calls Filler. I try to cast Nova, but it's on cooldown again, right? So that's why it's very important to have it cast once in every rotation. Now, what does it look like if I do cast a lightning in between? So I'll start it with Meteor Nova this time, so you can see Nova off cooldown first. So it might look something like this. Meteor, Nova, Lightning, Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning. And now you see my Nova is magically off cooldown. I need it because I'm casting Lightning in between. Right, so here, see Nova's off cooldown again. So this way it becomes, smooth and how I should. So that might be a little bit overwhelming, but the gist of how you want to play Sword and not think too much is you cast Fusion off cooldown, Ice Lance Hailstorm off cooldown, and then you do Arcane Void Pulse, put a lightning in between, Meteor Nova, put a lightning in between. So it would just look something like this. Right, cast this, go Arcane Void Pulse, put a lightning in between, Meteor Nova, put a lightning in between, important skills, Arcane Void Pulse, put a lightning in between, Meteor, Nova, put a lightning in between. And then this guarantees that your Nova is always going to come off cooldown at the right time. And it also teaches you discipline to not spam lightning too much. And because you only want to use it as a filler and to get your Nova off cooldown to bridge for your important cooldown skills to come off scene like this. So that's the gist of Sword outside of your. Now, if you remember from the last section, I mentioned more or less how your rotation looks like outside of Burn. So inside of Burn, it's not actually any different. So the only difference is, you know how outside of Burn, I said to do your important skills, and then you go Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, Meteor, Nova, Lightning, and they put your important skills in between. Inside of Burn, it's pretty much the same thing, except when you do your blocks, you go Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, and then you put your Fusion in between, and you go Meteor, Nova, and then you put your Hailstorm kind of in between. So you have your Ice, like your Hailstorm, goes through with your Meteor, Nova, and then you have your Ice Lances go with Arcane Void Pulse, and you put one Lightning with your Arcane Void Pulse to get your Meteor and Nova to sync up properly, and then you just put fusions in between all of them. That might seem a bit overwhelming, so I'll try to break it down in a couple examples. So I'll just do like an example of how it looks like first before I explain it. So it might look something like this. And you'll see that is pretty much your burn. And all I really did was I get my Ice Lance, Hailstorm, and Fusion off cooldown as soon as possible, and then split everything else between my Arcane Void Pulse and Meteor Nova. Now, if I was to explain how that might look like, it's basically you start off with Hailstorm to get your cooldown reduction buff, and then you want your Ice Lances to give the ice for your Arcane Pulse, and Hailstorm to give your ice for your Meteor Nova, and you want to put one Lightning with your Arcane Void Pulse to reduce the cooldown of your Nova, and then you basically just go Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, Fusion, Meteor, Nova, Hailstorm, Fusion, and your Ice Lance kind of comes up to go with your Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, Fusion, and you just do that over and over again. So I'll try to demonstrate it this time, where I go start with this, that pop, go Fusion, and I go Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, Fusion, Meteor, Nova, Fusion, Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, Fusion, Meteor, Nova, Hailstorm, Fusion, and then my Ice Lance comes up to go with my Arcane, and I go Fusion. Meteor, Nova, Fusion, Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, Fusion, Meteor, Nova, Hailstorm, Fusion, Arcane, Void Pulse, Lightning, Fusion. And that is pretty much how your burn plays by default. So this is how you do your Brooch burn or your implosion burn. Well, it's not really your Brooch burn, it's just like mostly your implosion burn, since implosion's on 2 minutes and then your Brooch is on 3 minutes. So the difference between this and the regular mana boost rotation is all you do is you put implosion in the opening to skip your first lightning with your arcane pulse. Right, with your arcane pulse. And then you do the rest of it the same. So it might look something just like this. You'll notice that I switched the order of some of my skills a little bit here and there, and that's because of muscle memory. But the gist of it is that's the framework of how you want to play it. This is how my hits look like, and ideally you want to get 10 fusions, like 10 hits of fusion per mana boost, and then you want 5 arcane pulse, which is 4 hits times 5 here, and then 4 meteors, which is 5 times 4, and then this is 4 casts of ice lance, I think, or 5, and then yeah, the rest of it's kind of just this. That is more or less how your burn breakdown should look like. On this section, I'll talk a little bit about some of the more advanced stuff. The first thing is right when you get outside of burn, you want to try to get your regular fusion off as soon as possible. So when you come out of burn, you just want to get your 2 elements and then press fusion as soon as possible so you get it on cooldown. If you end up missing a fusion during your decay, it costs you about 0.8% of your total damage, like your total damage breakdown. So it is pretty significant. But you know that happens. You can't always avoid it. And then you'll notice from the last section, I started with Void Pulse into Arcane, and that is a muscle memory. The reason why is because Void Pulse is your most important skill inside of your burn, outside of Fusion. And the reason why I'm doing Void Pulse into Arcane is because Void Pulse has a reset EP. So if Void Pulse resets, so I can go Void Pulse Arcane and then go Void Pulse again. This gives you like a window of opportunity to use Void Pulse resets without compromising your rotation very much. So over here, I'll show you how that might look like if I start Void Pulse into Arcane. It's pretty much the same thing, but you have more opportunities to use Void Pulse, so it's a little bit better. Unfortunately, Void Pulse is not resetting in this run, but that's okay. And then you also notice one thing is I'm casting Frost Sphere sometimes. Now, that is really important to get a habit into if you're screwing up your elements at any point, because you'll notice inside Burn, we're relying on Hailstorm and Ice Lance to get us our ice. But in that example, I had a couple cases where I didn't have an ice element and my fusion is coming off cooldown after my Aquarium Void Pulse or Meteor Nova. And so in that case, you just tap Frost Sphere once to get the ice proc that you need to cast fusion and continue your rotation until they align up again. That is really important to know. And then while we're at that, it's also a good idea to get into your mind that fireball can give you fire, frost sphere can give you ice, and lightning can give you lightning. So if you're ever doing your rotation in your burn especially, and you're missing an element, you fill it with fireball, lightning, or frost sphere. Finally, in this section, I'm going to demonstrate a couple of example grab runs. So here, I'm going to do a very basic rotation where I go Arcane Void Pulse and I skip the Void Pulse reset, and I'll do it for about 3 burns, so 2 minute and 30. The reason why you want to do it for 2 minute and 30 is because your Brooch has a 3 minute cooldown. So if you do a 2 minute, 3 minute burn on the boss, you, and then you reset it, right? your Brooch will be back off cooldown to practice again next time. So this is how my look like. You'll notice I pop a Glacial Retreat at the beginning because it gives you speed up on your Arcane Pulse, which is really important to have just for a little bit of extra bonus. And then I also pop Mana Boost at the beginning, and that, I mean not Mana Boost, Mana Barrier. And that's important because you can use it to tank some damage and keep the 80% buff on your weapon piece, because the weapon has a line that makes you do more damage at higher HPs, so that can keep you a little bit more topped off. That is also important for why I have auto potion on like 80% to keep myself healthy so I could do a little bit more damage. So here you'll see the clock is hitting 1 minute soon, and then when it hits 1 minute, that's when you pop, regardless if you're an Arcane Meteor, Arcane Void Pulse or Meteor Nova part of your rotation, because this is when your tank and healer pop their buffs. So you'll look at my Shinra meter, I look at the clock, it's 1 minute 16. The next time I pop will be at 2 minutes. So don't just pop off cooldown, you want to pop basically at the minute mark. I'm pretty much just doing the same thing over and over again, where I put like 1 lightning or 2 between each rotation, try not to overspam it, and then I put my important skills between like fusion. It's pretty brain dead once you get the hang of it. And then 2 minutes have come, so I hop here. Meteor Nova, I'll go for implosion soon. Meteor Nova. And then just pretty much do that over and over again. Here I did lightning at the very end because I was afraid if my Arcane Pulse will hit the boss in time to get my last fusion. That is a bit more advanced, but once you play the class enough, you'll get the hang of when to do that. And this is how my hits kind of look like without taking advantage of a Void Pulse resets in a 2 minutes 30. You ideally want 10 fusions per burn, but if you get 9, it happens. Just keep practicing, and sometimes you just miss it because you play a little bit bad. It happens. Finally, on this section, I'm gonna try to play it as normal. So I'll do the Void Pulse, Arcane Void Pulse, and I'll probably be doing a little bit more tweaks to my rotation when things get weird, but they're just kind of an example. So. The main thing is to don't overcompensate on your lightning thrower inside burn, because you really don't have like the time to do it, because you simply have more important things to cast. And then here, 2 seconds left on my burn, so I cast the lightning first to guarantee I get my 10 fusion. You'll notice I stalled my fusion a bit. That is not intentional, that's me playing poorly, but it just happens and it's what it is. Just kind of accept it. Not a big deal, as long as you're not losing casts of fusion at the end of the day. So 1 minute comes, I pop. Void Pulse reset. So I thought to Void Pulse twice there, do that rotation. Void Pulse reset again. I'm going to throw it here this time, just to demonstrate how I might fix the rotation if I reset it like that. And there you'll see my meteor gave me the fire from our Arcane Clock. So it's kind of nice, but try to not do that unless you're very comfortable. And if you're 1 second on mana boost, so I just fill the elements to get my 10 fusion off. and then back to default gameplay. And 1 minute 40, so 20 seconds before I pop. One minute 50. 1 minute 54. 1 minute 56, and I'll pop here. I'll implosion on this block. My lightning there because I didn't get a lightning off before to get my Nova off on cooldown. And I lightning once, so now my Nova's off. And then here, once I can put my fusions off, so I tried to get Thor, but I fucked up, so I missed it. And then that's where we end at, which is kind of like before, but whatever. It sometimes depends on how you play your rotation sets, and if you overfill your lightning, and also just, so things will have some variance, but it's not like a big deal. So at the end of the day, you want your Arcane Pulse and your Ice Lances to crit about 80%, and then your Meteor, Effusion, Void Pulse, Nova, Lightning, etc. crit like about 100 or close enough to it. So if these ever go below 90 or even like 95, you might want a bit more